There are two kinds of men who write away for a wife. The kind who has run out of women willing to look at him, and the kind who has run out of time. Eli Brandt was the second kind, and I knew it the morning he asked me to ride into Bracken with him to meet the noon stage, because his hands were shaking, and Eli Brandt's hands had not shaken once in the 11 years I'd known him. Not when he buried his wife, not when the bank man came, not the night the diphtheria took 2 of his children inside the same week, and he dug the graves himself in frozen March ground because he would not let anyone else touch them. I'm telling you this so you'll understand. When a man like that trembles, it isn't fear of a stranger. It's fear of hope. Hope is the heaviest thing a poor man can carry, and Eli was carrying enough of it that day to break a stronger back than his. He had sent for a woman he'd never seen, to mother 5 living children he could no longer feed and raise alone. That was the bargain, plain as a fence post. What stepped down off that stage was not the bargain. What stepped down off that stage made the whole of Bracken go so quiet you could hear the harness leather creak, and it changed everything I thought I understood about charity and shame, and what it costs a person to do the right thing when the right thing is the very thing that ruins you. I wrote it all down. I always do, so let me start where it started and let it find its own way to the end. The stage was late, which surprised nobody. Bracken in the summer of '83 was the kind of town the world forgot to finish. 2 streets crossing like a poorly drawn X, a church with a bell but no preacher most months, a mercantile run by a Dutchman named Voss who weighed his flour with his thumb on the scale and dared you to say so. I keep a tally book in my breast pocket, have done since I was a boy, and that morning I'd already filled half a page with nothing in particular. Wind from the south. Brandt nervous. Coffee at the depot tastes like the bottom of a kettle. It's a habit my late mother gave me, the writing down. She said a man who keeps account of small things will not be so easily fooled about the large ones. I have found this to be mostly untrue, but I keep at it anyway, the way you keep wearing a hat your father left you. Eli stood at the edge of the platform with his hat in both hands. He'd shaved. That's how I knew the size of the thing to him. Eli Brandt had shaved on a Tuesday. The collar of his good shirt was buttoned so tight it left a red line on his throat, and he kept smoothing the front of it down like there was something there to smooth, though there wasn't, just the worn cotton and the bones underneath. "You'll say something stupid," I told him. "When she gets here, you always do when it matters." "I know it. So don't talk, let her talk." He nodded like a man agreeing to hold his breath underwater. Behind us, half of Bracken had drifted out to watch, not openly, you understand, but a town that's small doesn't have to pretend very hard. Voss was sweeping a porch that was already clean. The Prout sisters had found urgent business at the window of the dress shop that sold no dresses. Old Hannigan sat on the bench outside the saloon with his pipe and his one eye, looking at nothing and seeing all of it. A man cannot send away for a wife in a town like Bracken and expect it to be private. It is the closest thing to theater we get out here, and folks come hungry to it. I should tell you about the children, because they were there too, lined up on the boardwalk in their cleanest dirty clothes, and they were the whole reason for everything. There had been 7. Eli always said 7, even now, even after. 7 is the number he counted at night, I think, the way you keep counting a limb that's gone. The 2 the diphtheria took, a boy of 4 and a girl just walking, were named but not spoken of, and you learned quick not to ask. The 5 living ranged from a girl near grown to a boy still in skirts. Ruth was the eldest, 16 and already old in the way that grief and responsibility age a face, holding the littlest one, Sam, against her hip the way she'd been holding him since their mother died and her own girlhood ended in the same hour. Then the twins, Caleb and Joseph, 10 years between them and the world, all elbows and watchfulness. And Pearl, who was 8 and did not speak, had not spoken since the burying. The doctor in Tucson said it would pass, and the doctor in Tucson was wrong. It did not pass. That was the household. That was what a stranger from back east had agreed to step into, sight unseen. On the strength of an advertisement, Eli had paid Voss 2 bits to help him word, because Eli could read a brand and a Bible and not much else. I had seen the advertisement. I'll tell you what it said because it tells you the man. Widower 39 with children seeks a Christian woman of sound health and patient temper to make a home. Have land, not money. Will treat kindly. No deceivers. No deceivers. He'd insisted on that line. Voss had laughed and Eli had not, and the line stayed. The stage came up the road in a haze of its own dust, and I felt Eli go rigid beside me like a fence wire pulled tight. The driver, a sour article named Gantry, hauled the team down and the whole rig groaned to a stop in front of the depot, and for a moment nothing happened. Dust settled. A horse stamped. Somewhere a dog barked once and thought better of it. Then the door opened. A woman came down first, and I heard Eli's breath go out of him. She was younger than I'd reckoned, 30, maybe less, and not a beauty, but not the worn-down article a man expects to answer such an advertisement either. She had a strong, plain face, a wide mouth, dark hair pinned tight under a traveling bonnet gone gray with road dust. Her dress was good once and mended careful since. She held herself straight as a board. She looked at Eli, and Eli looked at her, and for the length of one heartbeat I thought, well, that's that, it'll be fine, look at her, she's got steel in her. And I had my pencil half out to make a note of the hour for the sake of the record. And then she turned back to the stage door and put her hand up, and a child took it. Not Eli's child, a child off the stage. A girl of maybe 6, in a faded blue dress too big for her, with black hair in 2 thick braids, and a face the color of creek clay in the morning sun, and dark eyes that took in the whole starring town in one slow sweep, unafraid. The way a deer is unafraid right up until the second it isn't. An Apache child. I want to be honest about what happened to the air in that moment, because if I soften it I'll be lying, and my mother's rule was against being fooled, mostly by myself. The air went out of Bracken. Voss stopped sweeping. The Prout sisters' window went silent. Hannigan took the pipe out of his mouth. There is a sound a crowd makes when it has stopped breathing, and it is no sound at all, and it is the loudest thing in the world. Out here in those years, you understand what that child's face meant to the people standing on that boardwalk. There had been raids in the territory still within memory. There were men in Bracken that morning who had lost kin, or said they had, or wished to be thought to have, which amounts to the same hatred in the end. The army had Geronimo running somewhere south of us that very summer, and every dust cloud on the horizon set the town to muttering. To those people, that little girl in the blue dress was not a little girl. She was a story they had been told their whole lives, walking down the steps of the noon stage holding a white woman's hand. The woman, I would learn her name, was Cordelia, Della, though no one used it for a long while, came down the last step and stood in the dust with the child's hand in hers, and she lifted her chin and looked straight at Eli Brandt, and she did not explain. That was the thing. She did not explain. She did not rush into it the way a frightened person does, throwing words ahead of themselves to fill the silence. She just stood there and let him see, and let the whole town see, and waited. I have thought about that a great deal in the years since. It would have been so easy to explain. A few sentences. She's an orphan, the camp was burned, the army left her, I couldn't leave her to starve, she has no one. Any of it true, all of it true, as I'd learn. A few sentences and she'd have turned the town's horror into the town's pity, which is an ugly thing too, but a survivable one. She knew that. I'm certain now she knew exactly what she was doing. She would not buy the child's place with an apology. She would not let the first thing Bracken learned about that little girl be that she was a problem to be excused for. Whatever else Della was, and she was a great many things, hard ones. Before the end, she would not do that. Eli's mouth opened. I remembered far too late what I'd told him. Don't talk. Let her talk. But she wasn't talking. And so Eli Brandt, who said the wrong thing when it mattered, every time without fail, opened his mouth in front of the whole starring town. And he said, "You'll be hungry, both of you. There's stew at the house." I have heard a great many fine speeches in my life. Preachers and politicians and dying men have all had their say in my hearing. I have never heard anything to touch those 11 words. There's stew at the house. He didn't ask. He didn't flinch. He didn't say who is this or this wasn't the bargain or any of the dozen things a smaller man would have grabbed for. He looked at the woman and the child and he counted them. I watched him do it. I watched his eyes go from her face to the girls and back. And he added them to his account. And the account was already drowning him. 5 children and no money and land that wouldn't grow a decent crop of regret. And he added 2 more without a flicker. Because they were hungry and it was noon, and that was, to Eli, the entire question. Della's chin came down just a fraction. Her eyes shone. She got it under control fast. I'd come to learn she got everything under control fast, but I saw it. And I wrote it in my book that night, the only note I made that whole crowded day. She did not expect kindness. That's the saddest thing I have learned about a person in some time. Now I have to tell you about the rest of that boardwalk, because Eli's 11 words did not settle the matter. 11 words from a poor rancher do not move a town. They only show the town what it's deciding against. Birch Stallard was the one who spoke. He would be. Stallard ran cattle on the good water north of Eli, 3 times the land and 10 times the cattle, and a voice he liked the sound of. He'd lost a brother to a raid back in '71, which was true, and he'd built the whole of himself around that grief the way a tree grows around a nail until you can't tell the man from the wound anymore. Brant, he came off the saloon bench slow, the way big men do when they want you to watch them coming. You out of your mind or just out of shame? Birch, Eli kept his voice even. Town's eating its dinner, let's not. That's an Apache, Stallard said it loud for the crowd, the way you'd point at a snake in a churchyard. You're going to take an Apache into your house, with your daughters, with Ruth. He let Ruth's name sit there. It was a filthy thing to do, and he did it on purpose. After what they done. After everybody here has buried somebody on account of them. And here is where I have to tell you something hard, because the prompt of my own memory won't let me pretty it. I said nothing. I stood there beside my friend with my pencil in my pocket and my heart going like a hammer, and I said nothing, because Birch Stallard owned the note on a piece of my land, and I was afraid, plain and simple, and a man's friendship is worth exactly as much as he's willing to pay for it, and that morning I was a coward who would not pay. I have squared that account since, but not that day. That day I let it stand. It was Ruth who answered him. 16 years old, with little Sam on her hip, she stepped down off the boardwalk into the dust, and she put herself between Stallard and the child, between Stallard and a stranger she had known for the length of a single held breath, and she said, in a voice that did not shake the way mine would have, "She's hungry, Mr. Stallard. That's all I see standing there. A little one that's hungry. If that means something different to you, that's a thing wrong with you, not her." Lord, the silence after that. I wrote her words down that night too, exact, because I never wanted to forget that a girl raised in the middle of all that grief and poverty had more grace in her at 16 than a town full of grown men had between the lot of them. Ruth Brant. Remember this. Remember she was the one. Stallard's face went the color of a brick. A girl had faced him down in front of everyone, and there's no recovering from that, not for a man like Birch, not in public, not without making it worse. He looked at Eli. "This isn't finished," he said, which is what a man says when he's lost the moment and means to win the year. He looked at the little Apache girl one more time, a long, ugly look, the kind that promises things. Then he spat in the dust, not at her, but near enough to mean it, and turned and walked back into the saloon, and the doors swung behind him, and somewhere in there a chair scraped, and the regular dim murmur of men started up again, lower than usual, the way a kettle mutters before it boils. We loaded the wagon mostly in silence. There wasn't much to load. Della had come with a single trunk, scuffed and strapped twice with rope where the latch had given out, and a carpet bag, and that was the whole of 2 lives. I lifted the trunk and it was lighter than it had any right to be, and I understood that whatever she'd had once, this was what was left of it, and she had spent the rest getting here. The child rode in back with the Brant children. I watched that part close, because I'm a curious man by nature and because, I'll admit it, I half expected trouble, children being children and the world's poison being learned early. But here is the thing about children that grown men forget on purpose. Hatred has to be taught, and it takes time, and these had not had the lesson yet, not really, not down in the bone where it counts. Caleb, one of the twins, stared at the girl the whole first mile with his mouth open. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a horehound drop, gone soft and gray with lint, the kind of treasure a poor boy carries for weeks before he can bring himself to eat it. He held it out. The girl looked at it, looked at him, took it, put it in her mouth, and Caleb grinned like he'd won a horse, and that was the whole negotiation, the entire treaty, concluded in the back of a wagon between a 10-year-old and a candy gone to lint, while the grown world behind us was still deciding whether the child had a right to exist. Pearl, the one who didn't talk, scooted over without a word and sat close to the girl, shoulder to shoulder, and rode the rest of the way like that, the two of them looking out at the passing scrub, and I thought, there's two silences keeping each other company, and I had to look at the road for a while. Up front, Della sat beside Eli with her hands folded in her lap and her back straight, and they did not speak for a long while. The wagon creaked. The mule's ears worked back and forth. The land went by, dun and silver and merciless, and, in its way, beautiful, the way only a thing that's trying to kill you can be. Finally, Eli said, not looking at her, "What's her name?" They called her different things at the fort. Della's voice was low, careful, like a person setting down something they'd carried a long way and were afraid to drop. The soldiers gave her one. I don't use it. It wasn't kindly meant. A pause. Her people had a name for her. I asked her when she'd trust me to. She told me. Another pause, and something moved in Della's face that I caught from where I rode alongside, something between tenderness and a grief so deep it had its own weather. It means the one who stayed. She was the only one left after, the only one who stayed, so. She looked down at her folded hands. I call her stays. It's not right either, but it's what I've got and she answers to it, and it's the truth, which is more than I can say for the rest of what's been done to her. Eli drove a while, the mules pulled, the dust rose. "Stays," he said, trying it, "all right." And then after a long time, in the same flat voice he'd have used to remark on the weather, "There's a bed for Ruth and the girls. Stays can have it with them if she'll take it. I'll move Caleb and Joseph out to the Linta with me. They've been wanting to anyhow, think it makes 'em men. A beat. Won't be much. Wasn't much before you came. Less now, I expect, by 2 more mouths." Della turned to look at him then, full on, for the first time since the stage. "You sent for a woman to ease your load," she said quietly, "and I've brought you a heavier one, I know it. You'd be within your rights to put us both back on the next stage and not lose a wink over it. Most men would. Some would call it sense." She drew a breath. "So I'll ask it plain once and then I won't ask it again because I haven't got the strength to ask it twice. Will you keep her? Not put up with her. Not suffer her. Keep her. Because I'll tell you now, Mr. Brant, if there's a day coming when you'll set her out, set me out with her this evening and save us both the heartbreak of getting used to a roof." And Eli Brant, who said the wrong thing every time it mattered, looked at the road ahead of his mules and was quiet for the space of 3 fence posts, and then he said the only thing I have ever heard him say that I'd carve into stone if I had the means. "My boy that died," he said, "the little one, we never did find why God took him and left others. My wife asked it every day till she went too. I quit asking." He flicked the reins gentle. "Maybe this is why. Maybe I was supposed to have the room for one more and it just took me this long to find out who. I don't know. I'm not a clever man, but I know hungry when I see it, and I know I've got stew, and I know I'm not the kind to count out portions by the color of who's eating." He paused. "She stays, the little one. That's what you said it means, didn't you? Stays." He almost smiled. It was a terrible, tired, beautiful thing, that almost smile. "Then she's named right for this house. We're all of us just the ones who stayed." Della put her face in her hands. She didn't make a sound. Her shoulders shook once, twice, and then she got it under control fast, the way she did everything, and she lifted her head and looked straight ahead and never let him see the rest of it. I rode a little ways off so as not to be in it. A man's entitled to that much. That should be where I leave you for now, at the start of the thing, with 2 strangers and 7 children, or 5 and 2, or just 7 again if you counted the way Eli counted, and a town behind us with its mind already half made up to be cruel about it. But I'll tell you the one more thing, the thing I didn't understand that day and wouldn't for weeks, because it's the hook the whole rest of this turns on, and you'd not forgive me if I hit it. That night after the stew, after the children slept, I sat up with Eli by the linta while Della settled the little ones, and I asked him the question I'd been chewing on the whole ride. Why'd she do it, Eli? Truly. A woman with nothing, answering an advertisement for a roof, and she shows up dragging the one thing on God's earth most likely to get that roof taken back. Why? What's she to that child? And Eli, who is not a clever man, looked at me across the little fire and said something cleverer than he knew. I've been wondering the same, but I figure it's her business to tell, not mine to ask. He poked the fire, though I'll say this. When Stallard said his piece back in town, when he said his brother said the raids, said all of it, I watched her face, and it didn't go to anger the way you'd think, it went somewhere else. He frowned, hunting the word, finding it. It went guilty, Asa, just for a second, like he'd hit something true. He shook his head. I don't know what that woman's carrying, but it's heavier than a trunk and a carpet bag, and it's got something to do with how she came by that child, and I don't think I couldn't leave an orphan to starve is the whole of it. Not by a long road. He was right. He was so much more right than either of us could have known, sitting there by that little fire under all those uncountable stars, with the wind coming up from the south the way I'd marked in my book that morning before any of it, when the worst I had to write down was bad coffee and a nervous friend. Della had not told us everything. Della had not told us anything at all. The first stone came through the church window on a Sunday in August, and I was close enough to feel the chip of it sting my cheek. I'll come back to the stone. I have to, because it's the hinge the whole month turned on. But you should know how we got to a Sunday with stones in it, because it didn't happen all at once. Cruelty in a small town is rarely a fire. It's a frost. It comes a degree at a time overnight while everybody's asleep and innocent, and one morning you walk out and find the whole field killed and not a soul who'll admit to feeling the cold come down. Let me account for it the way it happened. My mother's rule. Small things first so I won't be fooled about the large. In the 3 weeks after the stage, the Brandt house did a thing I had not expected and would not have believed if I hadn't watched it from the next ridge with my own eyes and written it down. It got happier. Not easier. Lord, not easier. There was no more money than before, which is to say there was none, and now there were 2 more mouths and the well was low, and the corn was a joke the land told at Eli's expense. But Della Brandt, and she took the name within the week. A justice of the peace named Foss came out and did it in the dooryard in 11 minutes flat. No party, no flowers. Foss collecting his fee and not meeting anybody's eye. Della Brandt could make $1 scream for mercy. She could turn a thing other folks threw out into supper. She knew herbs I'd never heard of and put up the garden like she was fighting a war against winter, which I suppose she was. She mended. She scrubbed the years of widower grime out of that house till the windows let light again. And she did not coddle those children, not for a minute. She was strict as a schoolmarm and twice as quick. But she saw them, every one, which is a different and rarer thing than loving them, and harder, and they bloomed under it like the garden did. Pearl spoke. I have to set that down careful because of all the small things it was the one that undid me. Pearl, who had not made a word since they buried her mother, who the Tucson doctor gave up on, Pearl spoke. It was nothing. It was over a chicken. The hens had got into the garden and Della was after them with her apron flapping, and Pearl, 8 years old and silent for 2 years, suddenly hollered, "Go on, you stupid bird," at a Dominican hen, clear as a church bell, and then clapped both hands over her own mouth and stood there with her eyes the size of saucers, terrified of the sound she'd made. Della didn't make a fuss. That was the genius of her. She didn't whoop or weep or call the others. She just looked over at Pearl, easy as anything, and said, "He is a stupid bird. You tell him again, he's not listening," and went back to chasing the hen. And so Pearl told the bird again, and then a third time, and by supper time she was talking like a creek in spring runoff. 2 years of words coming out all at once and out of order. And Eli sat at the head of that table and put his hand over his eyes and pretended it was the smoke from the fire. The little one's stays was slower. You'd expect it. She'd buried more before her 6th year than most folks do before their 50th. For the first 2 weeks she watched everything and trusted nothing and slept, Ruth told me, with her shoes on. But Caleb's whorehound diplomacy held. The twins claimed her like a project. Pearl, newly loud, appointed herself translator of the whole loud world to a child who had a fair amount of English already but let them think she didn't, because being taught is its own kind of being kept. And stays began slow to thaw. She started leaving her shoes by the bed. She started laughing first at the twins, who'd do anything for a laugh, then on her own account, at things that were funny only to her, which is the surest sign a child is becoming a person again and not just surviving. So that's the house. That's the warm thing, the thing worth fighting for, growing up green out of the worst-watered ground in the territory. I want you to have it whole in your mind because of the frost. The frost came from town, and its weather was Birch Stallard. He didn't ride out and make threats. Birch was cleverer than that and patienter, and that's what made him dangerous, a stupid, cruel man you can outwait, but a patient one builds. He started where money lives. He had a word with Voss at the mercantile, and the next time Eli sent Caleb in for flour and nails on the book, the way he'd done for 11 years, Voss wouldn't carry it. Cash only, Brant accounts closed, nothing personal, nothing personal. The two most dishonest words in the English language, and Voss said them to a 10-year-old. Then the church. There was a circuit preacher came through Bracken maybe one Sunday in 4, a soft round man named Pleasance who I never once saw take a hard stand on anything but the offering plate. But the women ran the church between his visits, the way women run most things that men take the credit for, and the women of Bracken, under the generalship of the Prout sisters, who had taken Stallard's part the way a barnacle takes a ship's, decided that the Brant pew was a moral hazard. Nobody told Della to stay home. That's not how the frost works. They just stopped saving her a place. They just got quiet when she came in. They just moved their skirts aside in the narrow doorway, an inch. That's all, an inch of cloth, and an inch of cloth can say you are filth louder than any sermon ever preached the love of God. Della went anyway. 3 Sundays running. Straight-backed, every child scrubbed and braided, the little one's hand in hers, and she sat in the cold of it and sang the hymns in a clear, strong alto and did not give 1 inch of cloth back to those women. And I admired her so much in those weeks it was a physical pain in my chest. And I'll tell you what I did about it finally, because I promised you I'd squared my account and a man should show his work. The 3rd Sunday, I came down off my ridge and put on my one good coat and I walked into that church and I sat down in the Brant pew, next to Eli, with the whole town watching. It cost me. I want to be honest that it cost me because I am wary of the kind of story where a man does the right thing and the bill never comes. Within the month Stallard called my note. I lost the south quarter of my land over it, sold it to him, in the end at his price, which was robbery, and we both knew it. I am not telling you this to be admired. I am telling you because for 3 weeks I had been a coward, the kind that says nothing personal with his silence, and I had had to sit by my own fire and live with the man I saw doing it. And one Sunday I decided I would rather lose a quarter section than lose the rest of myself. That's the whole of my heroism. It was bought with shame and paid for in dirt. Most real courage is. Eli didn't say anything when I sat down. He just moved his hat over so I'd have room I didn't need, and his jaw worked once, and that was thanks enough between men who'd known each other 11 years. Now the stone. It came the 4th Sunday, late August, hot enough to bake bread on the church steps. Pleasance was actually present that week mid-sermon, going on about the Good Samaritan of all the topics, I swear to you, the Good Samaritan, and not one soul in that building heard the joke God was making, when the window behind the pulpit went to pieces. The stone was the size of a hen's egg. It struck the back of a pew, ricocheted, and the chip of it caught me below the eye, and I've still got the little white scar to prove the day was real. For a second nobody moved. Then somebody screamed, and Pleasance ducked behind his own pulpit like a prairie dog, and there was the general scramble of folks discovering they had spines after all now that the danger had mostly passed. But here is the thing I saw, because I was looking the right direction at the right moment, the way you sometimes are, and I wrote it in my book that very afternoon with my hand not quite steady. Stays, the little girl, did not flinch. The stone broke the glass not 8 feet from where she sat, and she did not flinch. She turned her head slow and looked at the broken window, and then she looked down at her own hands folded in her lap, and her face did a thing no child's face should ever know how to do. It went patient. It went used to this. It had the look of a person who had long ago stopped being surprised that the world threw things, and had only ever wondered which thing and when. And Della came up off that pew like something uncoiling, and she put her body between the child and the window, and the look on her face was not patient at all. It was a fury so old and so deep that it had gone past hot and come out cold, the way iron does. And she looked at the broken window, and then she looked, I saw her do it, she looked straight across the church at the side door, where a couple of Stallard's hands had been lounging through the service, and one of them was grinning. She didn't say a word. She gathered her children, I'd stopped, somewhere in those weeks, being able to count them anyway but whole, and she walked them out the front, past the inch of cloth, past the Prout sisters, past Pleasance reassembling his dignity, and she did not run and she did not hurry and she did not look at any of them. And when she got the little ones loaded in the wagon she climbed up and she sat there, straight as a fence post, waiting on Eli with her jaw set like a thing carved. That was the day I learned her secret. Not because she told me, because that fury cracked something open, and the thing that fell out of the crack, when I finally understood it, has kept me up more nights than I'll confess to. It came out slantwise, the way the true things do, 3 evenings later. I'd ridden over with a sack of cornmeal, my own, not bought, ground from my own poor crop, because the Brants couldn't get it on the book anymore, and pride is a luxury for people who aren't watching children measure their portions with their eyes. Eli was off after a strayed mule. The children were down. And Della and I sat on the step in the long blue evening and didn't talk for a while, which is the only way you ever get a guarded person to talk at all. You have to make the silence comfortable enough that the truth gets bored of hiding in it. You sat in our pew, she said finally. It cost you. It's only land. It's never only land, not out here. She was mending by the last of the light, her needle going steady. Why'd you do it? I thought about lying. I'm a writer down of small things, not a brave talker, and the true answer made me look bad. But she'd earned a true thing, sitting straight-backed under all that cloth for a month, so I gave it to her. Because I didn't the first day, at the stage. When Stallard said his piece, I stood there and I let it, and I've not been able to look at my own shaving glass right since. She was quiet a long moment. The needle went in, came out, went in. I let it too, she said, once, a thing worse than a man's hard words. In, out. You want to know how I came by her, you've wondered it. The whole town's wondered it, but you're the only one's been decent enough not to ask, and somehow that's worse, you're not asking, it sits there. You don't owe me. I don't owe you anything, sharp, then softer. But I'm tired, Mr. Coyle. I've carried it alone a long time, and I am so tired, and Eli, I can't tell. Not yet. He took me on No Deceivers. He put it in his advertisement, No Deceivers, and I am one. I'm the very thing he wrote that line against. So I can't tell him, not till I'm sure he can, till I'm sure he won't. She stopped, started over. So I'll tell you, and you can carry a little of it. Is that a cruel thing to ask? No, I said, tell me. And she did. I'll set it down the way she gave it, near as I can, because it's not my story to improve. Della had been married before. A man named Tom Caro, a freighter out of the settlements down south, and not by her telling a bad man at the start, just a weak one, the kind that goes whichever way the loudest men around him are going. They'd had no children of their own. The Lord or something had seen to that, and it was a grief between them that turned Tom mean by inches. In the spring of '71, and when she said the year, my whole body went cold, because '71 was Stallard's year too, the year of his brother, and I felt the shape of the thing before she'd drawn it. There'd been killings in their part of the territory. Raids. Stock run off. A teamster found dead on the Tucson road. A child taken from an outlying ranch. The settlements had worked themselves into the particular madness that comes over frightened people when the fear has nowhere righteous to go. And a party got up. Not soldiers. Soldiers, for all their sins, at least answered to somebody. This was the other kind, townsmen, freighters, men with grievances real and invented, and some hired guns, and some who just liked the permission. They rode out before dawn to a camp on a river bottom where they'd been told the raiders were sheltering. There were no raiders in that camp. There were old people and women and children and a few young men who'd come into the agency seeking peace, which they'd been promised and had believed in, the way the desperate believe in things. The party fell on them in the gray before light, and they did not stop to ask names, and what they did there in the river bottom Della would not describe to me, and I did not ask her to, and I have not written it here, and I won't. There are things a tally book is too small to hold. Some of the survivors, the children mostly, were not killed but taken, parceled out, sold, some of them, or kept as servants, which in those years and that country was a polite word for a thing without any polite words in it. Tom Caro rode with that party. He came home 3 days after with another man's silver in his saddlebag, and a thing behind his eyes that never left, and he did not speak of where he'd been, but the territory is small, and the women talk, and within a month Della knew. She knew what her husband's hands had done in the gray light of that river bottom, and she did the thing she would carry the rest of her life. The thing that flickered guilty across her face when Stallard stood up on that platform and spoke of raids and his murdered brother as though grief only ran one direction in this country. She did nothing. I knew, she said to me on the step in the dark, her needle gone still in her lap. I knew what he was, what he'd done. And I stayed in his house and I cooked his food and I lay in his bed and I said nothing because he was my husband and I was afraid and I told myself it wasn't my doing, it wasn't my hands, I wasn't there. For 2 years I told myself that. Her voice didn't break. I almost wished it would. The control of it was worse than weeping. And then he died fever the winter of '73, and I'll not pretend I grieved him the way a wife should, and I was free. And I had a little money for the first time in my life. His money, that money, and I thought, well, now you'll do something, Cordelia. Now there's nobody to be afraid of. Now you'll find out what doing nothing for 2 years is worth when you finally try to pay it back. She had gone looking. That's the part that takes the breath. A widow with no kin and a dead man's blood money. She had spent 3 years going from settlement to settlement, fort to fort, asking after the children taken from that river bottom, buying them back where she could, where they'd been kept and sold, freeing what few she could find and trying to get them home, to whatever home was left, which was mostly nothing, because the world her conscience was trying to repair had been ground to powder by men like her husband, and there was no putting powder back into stone. Most of the children were gone past finding, but she'd found one. A girl, 6 years old now, who'd been 4 in the river bottom and was the only soul left of a particular family, and who had been kept 3 years as a servant in a settlement house by people who called it Christian charity and worked her like a mule. And Della had bought her free with the last of Tom Caro's silver, and could not for her life find a single living relation to carry the child home to. So I had her, Della said, and no money left and no place in winter coming and a child who'd learned not to flinch at anything, and I thought, I have undone exactly nothing. One girl, out of a whole river bottom, one, and I can't even keep her warm. She picked the needle back up, set it down again, And then I saw the advertisement, a widower with children will treat kindly, no deceivers. She made a sound that wasn't a laugh. And God forgive me, I thought there, a roof. A man who treats kindly. I'll lie to get it. I'll be the deceiver his own advertisement warned against, and I'll get that child a roof before the snow. That's the whole of why I'm here, Mr. Coyle. I didn't come for love or even for ease. I came to steal a warm place for one girl out of a river bottom, because she's the only sin I ever found that I could halfway pay for, and I'll not put her down till I'm dead. I sat with that a long time. The cornmeal sack was at my feet, and the stars were coming, and somewhere off in the dark Eli was bringing in his strayed mule, and I had no words at all, which for a man who writes everything down is a strange and terrible thing. Finally, I said the only true thing I had. You didn't fire the gun, Della. No, she looked out at the dark. I just married it and ate off it, and kept its house and held my tongue and let it call me good. She folded the mending. There's a kind of evil that needs hands, Mr. Coyle, and there's a kind that just needs the rest of us to look the other way and pass the bread. I've been both. I'm trying to be the third kind now, whatever that is. The kind that stays. The kind that stays. The girl's name. I understood, finally, that Della hadn't just named the child. She'd named the thing she was trying to become. And then she told me the part that turned my blood, the part that is the hook of everything still to come. And she told it flat, looking at the stars, because she'd already given me the worst, and this was only the dangerous. Stallard knows, she said. I turned. Knows what? Tom, he knew Tom, her jaw set. I didn't place him at first 11 years, and I never saw the man but twice back then, but he placed me. I watched it happen that first day at the stage after Ruth faced him down. He went into the saloon and he stopped in the door and he looked back at me and I saw it land behind his eyes. Caro's widow, she breathed. Birch Stallard rode with that party, Mr. Coyle. His brother wasn't killed in any raid. His brother was killed in that river bottom by the young men defending it, the few there were before the end. That's the grief he's built his whole self on. That's the murder he's been avenging on a town's worth of strangers for 12 years. And I am the one living soul in this territory who knows his brother died with a torch in his hand and not a halo on his head. She finally looked at me, and her eyes in the starlight were the steadiest, most frightening thing I ever hoped to see. So you understand. It was never really about the child with Birch. The child's just the thing he can say out loud. What he can't have, what he'll burn this whole valley to keep buried, is anybody knowing what we all really were, out there in the gray, the morning we made ourselves into the very thing we'd ridden out to punish. A coyote went off somewhere, that high broken laugh they do, and another answered it, and the dark between the ridges seemed very large. He'll come for her, Della said quietly. Soon, with papers or with men or with a lie big enough to do it legal. He has to. Because as long as that child's under a roof in this valley, I'm under it too, and as long as I'm here, the truth he murdered to protect is just sitting at his supper table every night, eating his bread, looking at him. She stood, smoothing her skirts, the conversation closed, the guard coming back up where it lived. Tell Eli for me, will you? When it comes. I find I haven't got the courage to be the deceiver to his face. Tell him I'm sorry I lied to a good man, and tell him her voice caught once the only time all night. Tell him she stays, whatever it costs me, she stays. Then she went inside and the latch dropped, and I sat alone on the step with a sack of cornmeal and the whole sorry weight of it, and away off across the dark valley, though I surely imagined it, I thought I could see a single lit window up at the Stallard place, burning late, a man awake in it, deciding things. They came for the child on a Thursday, which I've always thought a coward's choice of day. Sunday would have meant facing the church. Saturday, the town. Thursday is a working day, a forgettable day, the day you do a thing you'd rather no one remember witnessing. Birch Stallard had a feel for such distinctions. He'd built a life on them. I was at the Brant place when the dust came up the road, 3 riders and a buckboard, moving with the unhurried certainty of men who believe the law is in their saddlebags, which, God help us, this once it nearly was. I'd taken to spending my Thursdays there since the night on the step. Della had given me a thing to carry, and I found I couldn't carry it from a distance. So I was splitting the last of my own woodpile in their yard, the cornmeal long eaten, when the riders crested the rise, and I set down the axe and felt my stomach go to water, and I had time for exactly one clear thought before they were in the dooryard. It's come, and nobody's ready, and nobody ever could be. Stallard rode in front, of course, big and easy in the saddle. Behind him came two of his hands, the grinning one from the church among them, I noted, and noted too that he'd stopped grinning, which told me something about the gravity even the hired men attached to the day. And in the buckboard sat a stranger in a town suit gone gray with travel, a soft pale man with ink-stained fingers and a leather case on his knees, holding it the way Pleasance held the offering plate, like it was the whole reason God had made him. That was the agency man. I never did catch his right name. In my book I called him only the paper, because that's what he was. He'd come up from the agency at the territory's request, at Stallard's request, dressed up as the territories to take an Apache child, reported to be living unregistered with white settlers, to one of the schools they'd built back east for the purpose. You've maybe heard of them. They took the children far from any country they knew, and cut their hair, and forbade their tongue, and gave them new names and new gods, and called it kindness. And a great many of those children did not come home, and some that did came home strangers to their own mothers. Stallard could not legally have a child shot in a dooryard in 1883, but he had found a thing the law would do for him. Slower and dressed in mercy, that came to the same end. A girl gone from this valley, gone from Della, gone past finding, lawful and stamped and filed. He'd been clever, I'll give the devil that. He hadn't come with a mob, he'd come with a clerk. Eli came out of the house. Della came to the door behind him and stopped there, one hand on the frame, and I watched her take in the buckboard and the leather case and go very still, the stillness of a woman who has been waiting for a particular knock her whole life and has just heard it. The children were inside. I prayed they'd stay there. They did not, of course. Children never do, not when it matters. Brant, Stallard didn't dismount. Men like him stay up high as long as they can. This is Mr. He gave the agency man a name I didn't keep, come up from the agency. He's got business with you, lawful business. I'd advise you hear it civil. The paper cleared his throat and opened his case, and read from a document in the flat droning voice of a man who has read many such documents to many such dooryards. I won't give you the whole of it. The meat was this. It had been reported and was believed that an Indian child of the Apache, of no enrolled band and no known guardian of record, was being held by the settler Brant. That the welfare of said child and the good order of the territory required she be conveyed to the care of the industrial school at somewhere back east, a name like a closing door, and that he, the paper, was empowered to take her into custody this day. He finished. He looked up over his spectacles, not unkindly, which was somehow the worst of it. "I'm sorry for the upset, ma'am," he said to Della. "It's the law, and it's meant for the child's own good. They learn a trade, they're fed. It's a better life than," he gestured vaguely at the poor house, the bad land, the whole hard scrabble of it, "than this." And Della said, in a voice I'd not heard from her, small, almost pleading, a voice with the spine gone out of it, "Please. She's settled. She's only just started to laugh again. You don't know what was done to her before, if you take her now." "It's the law, ma'am," the paper said again, gently, and shuffled his papers. And I understood that he was not a cruel man, and that this was worse than cruelty, that the machine of it would grind a child to nothing while every hand on the lever stayed clean and sorry and sure it had done right. Stallard watched Della beg, and a thing came into his face that I will not call a smile because it was uglier than that. It was satisfaction. 12 years of it. The widow Caro, who knew what he was, brought low at last in a dooryard, begging a clerk. That's when Della stopped begging. I saw the spine come back. I saw the small pleading woman fold up and the other one unfold, the one from the stage. the one who would not buy a child's place with an apology. She stepped down off the porch into the dust, and she walked past Eli, and she walked past the paper and his leather case, and she walked right up to Birch Stallard's stirrup and looked up at him on his big horse, and she said, not loud, "Not yet, get down, Birch. If you're going to do this, get down off that horse and do it on the ground like a man, where everybody can see your face." Now I have to tell you that we were not alone for this, though I've let it sound that way. Bracken had known. A town that small always knows. The riders had passed through it on their way out, and the word had run ahead of them and behind, and by the time Della said get down, there were maybe a dozen folks come out from town and strung along the road and the fenced line, drawn the way they're always drawn, hungry for the theater of someone else's ruin. The Prout sisters. Voss, wiping his hands on his apron. Hannigan with his one eye, Foss the justice, a scatter of the church women who'd moved their skirts aside. They'd come to watch the Apache child taken. That's the truth of it. They'd come for that. So Della had her audience. And I believe now she'd been waiting for it, that some part of her had known the only way to fight a thing built on a buried truth was to dig the truth up in front of as many witnesses as God would send, and let the having seen it become a thing the town could never again pretend away. Stallard didn't get down. "I'll not be ordered about in another man's yard by Tom Caro's leavings," he said, and he said Tom Caro loud on purpose, the way he'd said Ruth the first day to soil her with a name in front of the crowd. "That's right." He looked around at the strung-out witnesses, playing to them now. "You want to know who you've been taking the part of? This good Christian woman. She's the widow of Tom Caro, a freighter and a horse thief, dead these 10 years and good riddance. She came among us under a false flag, a deceiver. So before you weep over her hard luck, you ought to ask what kind of woman keeps an Apache like a pet, and what she's running from and—" "Your brother," Della said. Just that, 2 words. But she'd timed them into the half-breath where Stallard paused for air, and they cut his whole speech off at the root, and something in how she said them, flat, certain, almost gentle, made the dooryard go quiet. "Say again," Stallard said. "Your brother, Asa." She didn't know I shared the name till she said it. I saw her register it, a flick, and set it aside. "You've told this valley for 12 years that your brother was murdered by Apache raiders. You've built every cruelty you've ever done on that grave. You did it the first day at the stage. You did it just now. Everybody here has buried somebody on account of them." She turned, slow, and she said it to the crowd, not to him. "I'm going to tell you all where Birch Stallard's brother died. And how. And I was not there. I want that said plain. I was not there. I have no right to the cleanliness of having been somewhere else, because my husband was." "Don't," Stallard said. The satisfaction was gone out of his face entirely now. Something else had come into it. I'd call it fear if I'd ever credited him with the capacity. "Don't you." But she did. She told them about the river bottom. The spring of '71. The party that rode out before dawn, not soldiers, townsmen, freighters, men with grievances and men with none, to a camp on the river where they'd been told the raiders sheltered. She told them there were no raiders. She told them what was in that camp instead. The old, the women, the children, the few young men who'd come in seeking the peace they'd been promised. She told them what the party did in the gray before light, and she did not spare it, the way she'd spared me on the step. She gave it to that crowd whole and bloody and exact, the thing too large for any tally book, and I watched a dozen faces go white and then gray and then sick. "Asa Stallard died in that river bottom," she said. "Not raided, raiding. He died with a torch in his hand, killed by a boy of maybe 14 who was trying to keep his grandmother from burning. That boy died too a minute after. Everyone in that camp died, or near everyone, and the children that lived were taken and sold, and one of them, her voice did not break, would not break, she would not let it. One of them is the girl you've come to put in a buckboard today. She watched it. She was 4. She is the only living soul left of her whole family, and she has spent her short life being passed hand to hand by Christian people who worked her like a mule and called it charity. And the last 3 years she spent under the only roof that ever once asked her name before it asked her use." She looked up at Stallard. "You didn't come for her because she's Apache, Birch. You came for her because as long as she's alive and under a roof in this valley, the truth about your brother is alive too. And you'd rather send a 6-year-old across the country to die among strangers than let one child remind you that your grief was built on a lie, and your whole hard righteous life with it. There is a kind of silence that has a floor to it and a kind that doesn't. The first kind, you know it'll end, somebody'll cough, a horse'll stamp, the world will pick back up. The second kind has no bottom. It's the silence of a thing that's been said that can never be unsaid, falling and falling. That's the silence that came down on the Brant dooryard. The whole town speechless. I'd waited the whole story to use the word, and there it finally was, true and earned and nothing like I'd imagined it. Not the gasp of a crowd at a wedding surprise. The dead, bottomless quiet of a dozen people discovering at once that a story they'd lived inside for 12 years had a rotten beam in it, and that some of them, old Hannigan, I saw it cross his ruined face, one of the church women who put her hand over her mouth, Voss, who went the color of his own flower. Some of them had been there, or close to it, or kin to men who were, and had carried their own gray mourning silence all this time, each one alone, each one sure he was the only one who knew. Della had not just told a secret. She'd shown a whole town the shape of its own held breath. The paper stood there with his leather case, looking from face to face, and I watched the certainty drain out of him. He was a clerk. He'd come to execute a clean, lawful document about an unenrolled child of no known guardian. He had not come to stand in a dooryard while a woman dug up a massacre, and he had the look of a man who'd reached into a flour barrel and found a snake. Stallard's horse shifted under him. He'd gone gray, then red, and his hand had drifted toward the rifle on his saddle, and one of his own hands, the formerly grinning one, quietly moved his own mount a half-step away from his employer, which is the surest sign in the world that a man's power has died, when his own paid men start measuring the distance. Lies, Stallard said, but it came out wrong. It came out the way a man says it when he knows the crowd can see the truth on him. Caro's widow, a horse thief's widow, you'll take her word. I'll take it, said Voss. I near dropped my axe. Voss, the Dutchman with his thumb on the scale who'd closed the Brant account, who'd told a 10-year-old nothing personal. He stepped forward, wiping his hands on his apron, not looking at Stallard, looking at the dirt. My cousin rode in that party, he said, quiet to the ground. He came home and he drank himself dead in 4 years, and he never would say why, and now I know why, and I have closed an honest man's account on the word of, he jerked his head at Stallard without looking up, of that, and I am ashamed. I'll take her word. And it went around the dooryard like a thing catching. Not all of them. The Prout sisters held their faces shut as bank doors and turned and walked back toward town, and there were others stayed cold. Frost doesn't melt all at once any more than it comes all at once. But enough. Enough faces turned, enough eyes came up off the dirt, enough of the bottomless silence got a floor put under it by people deciding, one at a time in public, that they would not pretend anymore. But here's the thing, and Della knew it even as she won the crowd, and this is the heavy part, the part I've turned over 1,000 nights. The truth changed the town. It did not change the paper. The paper still had his writ. The law did not care what Assas Stallard had been doing when he died. The law's document concerned an Apache child of no enrolled band and no guardian of record, and every word of that was still, technically, lawfully true. Della could shame Birch Stallard into the ground. She could not argue a 6-year-old off a federal form. The paper, pale and shaken, said as much, said he was sorry, said he'd no choice, said the document was the document, and reached down for his case to climb out of the buckboard and do, sick at heart, the thing he'd been sent to do. And that's when Eli Brant, who had not said one word through all of it, said the thing that cost him everything he was. There's no Apache child here. The paper stopped, sir. You heard me. Eli stepped down into the yard. He was not a big man and he did not raise his voice and he did not have to. Your paper's for an Apache child of no guardian. There's no such here. There's my children." He didn't look back at the porch where the little ones had crept out, all of them, Ruth holding Sam, Pearl, the twins, and Stays among them with Pearl's arm around her. He kept his eyes on the paper. 7 of 'em, Lord help me, and that little one in the blue's been mine since before you ever heard of this valley. Her name's on no enrollment because she's no enrolled Indian. She's a Brant. You want to put a Brant on a buckboard, you'll need a different paper, and a witness who'll swear she's other than I say, and you'll find, now he did look around slow at the crowd, you'll find this valley's short of witnesses today. Aren't we? It was a lie. Everybody in that dooryard knew it was a lie, including the paper, including the child it was told to save. No deceivers. The man had put it in his own advertisement, had insisted on the line against Voss's laughing, had taken his wife to task in his own heart for being the very thing. And here he stood in his own dirt in front of God and the town and the law, lying flat and steady and unashamed, because he had counted the child into his account on the first noon and would not now count her back out, whatever the cost, and the cost was the one thing he'd ever truly owned, which was his name for an honest man. He chose the lie. The honest man chose the merciful lie, the way Della had once chosen the lie that brought her here, and I have never in my life seen 2 people meet each other so completely as those 2 did across that dooryard in that moment. The deceiver who'd finally told the whole truth, and the honest man who'd finally told the saving lie, having traded the one thing each had left to trade. The paper looked around the dooryard. He looked at Voss, who looked back level. He looked at Hannigan, who said in his cracked old voice, "I'm a witness. I'll swear she's Brant's, always was." He looked at Foss, the justice of the peace, who studied the sky and allowed as how territorial records out this far were a sorry patchwork, and he, for one, couldn't recall ever recording any Apache child, no, nor anybody else who'd want to swear contrary, would they, and let the question hang. And the paper, God bless the small, pale, frightened, decent man, closed his leather case. "It appears," he said carefully to no one, to the document, to his own conscience, "that I have been misinformed as to the facts on the ground. I'll have to refer the matter back to the agency for verification." He climbed into the buckboard. "These things take time," he said, "a great deal of time, years sometimes, files are lost." He looked for just a moment straight at Della, and something passed between them that I'd swear was the closest thing to grace I saw that whole day. "Good afternoon, ma'am, Mr. Brant. I'm sorry to have troubled your family." Your family, he'd come saying the child. He left saying your family. That's the whole distance the day traveled, right there in a clerk's choice of words. He turned the buckboard, and Birch Stallard sat his big horse alone in a dooryard full of people who'd known him all his life and would, from this day, cross the street from him, sat there with his lie dug up and laid out for everyone, his brother's grave gone hollow, his power bled out into the dirt in the space of a quarter-hour, and he had nothing. He looked at Della one last time, and there was murder in it, the old promising kind. But there were a dozen witnesses now, and the witnesses had found their spines, and a man can't avenge a buried truth once it's above ground. He wheeled his horse and rode out, and his hands followed at a distance that had grown wider, and the dust closed over them. And that was the last day Birch Stallard ever held 1 inch of power in the Bracken Valley, though it took the rest of his life to finish dying of it. I want to give you a clean ending. I find I can't, and I think you'd not trust me if I did. The truth is the writ never did get canceled, just buried, in the slow, honest negligence of a frontier that couldn't be bothered. The truth is some of the town came around and some never did, and the Prout sisters went to their graves cold, and the church stayed a near thing for years. The truth is I lost my South Quarter and never got it back, and don't, on balance, regret it, though I'd be lying if I said I never looked across that fence at Stallard's cattle on my old water and felt the old coward's arithmetic stir. And the truth is Eli and Della. I told you the marriage was a bargain, and it was, and a bargain is a poor cold start for 2 people to build a life on. The night of the dooryard, after the children slept, I left them alone and rode home, because some accounts a man's got no business witnessing. I don't know all of what was said between them. The no deceivers, the lie he'd told to undo her lie, the husband she'd buried and the wife he'd sent away for, and the strange, terrible thing they'd become to each other without either one quite meaning to. I know only what I saw weeks later, which was Eli Brandt put his hand over Della's on the supper table, plain in front of the children, the way you do a thing you've decided to keep doing. And Della let it stay there, and neither of them made anything of it. And that's as near to a love story as two such guarded people were ever going to give the watching world. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was a sight more than most folks manage who start with flowers. The last thing, and then I'll stop, because you asked me not to spell everything out, and I find for once I don't want to. Years on stays near grown by then, tall, quiet, with a way of looking at the world that still went patient sometimes when she thought no one watched. I came by the place on a Thursday out of old habit and found her alone in the yard, mending a fence, doing it right, the way Eli had taught her. We talked a while about nothing. And before I left I asked her the thing I'd wondered 11 years and never had the gall to ask. I asked if she remembered the river bottom, the gray morning, before. She set down the wire. She looked off east, the direction the buckboard had gone, the direction of all those schools that ate children, the direction she had not in the end been carried. I remember a little, she said, less every year. Mother used to worry I'd forget my people altogether. She picked the wire back up. But I remember she carried me. When the others ran, she carried me and she fell and she put me down behind a rock and told me a word. Our word, it meant stay. Stay here, stay still, stay alive. So I stayed. She tied off the wire neat and tested it with her hand. That's all I ever did. Everybody else ran or fought or died. I just stayed. She looked at me then and she almost smiled. The way Eli almost smiled. The way that family had of nearly doing it and meaning it more for the holding back. Mama Della says that's not nothing, she said. Staying. She says it's the hardest thing there is. She says it's what the whole house is named for. Then she went back to her fence, and I rode home, and I took out my book that night to set it all down the way my mother taught me, so I'd not be fooled about the large things by forgetting the small. And I found I couldn't write the last of it. I sat with the pencil a long while. Some accounts you keep, and some you just carry.